View the human brain strictly as a mechanical system, a network of 86 billion neurons firing in precise sequence, integrating sensory data and triggering motor responses. It is a biological machine operating with high-efficiency physical precision. Cognitive science excels at mapping this machine's functions. We can track exactly how the brain discriminates between environmental stimuli, how it controls behavior, and how it accesses its own internal states. Philosopher David Chalmers categorizes these as the easy problems of consciousness. They are considered easy because they yield to reductive explanation. This method solves a complex biological puzzle by stripping it down to its underlying physical mechanisms. Once you map the mechanism that performs the function, the mystery is solved. Consider biological heredity. To explain how traits pass between generations, biologists needed to find a physical storage and transmission mechanism. The discovery of DNA's specific atomic structure solved the problem. The physical mechanism fully accounted for the biological function. Neuroscience has attempted to apply this exact reductive method to the human mind. Yet, despite mapping the brain's circuitry in staggering detail, the method has failed to explain the existence of mental life. This failure leads to what Chalmers defines as the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem is not about how the brain processes information. It is about the phenomenon of experience itself. Neuroimaging can show us exactly which physical pathways light up when you see the color red or feel pain. This functionalist approach maps the wiring, but it offers no explanation for why those physical firings result in a vivid, internal, subjective reality. Researchers have isolated specific brain activities, like 40 Hz neural oscillations, that correlate with awareness. But identifying the physical mechanism that binds information together does not explain why that physical processing shouldn't just happen entirely in the dark, devoid of any inner life. To isolate what we mean by pure experience, we have to look past human cognition. Any organism that possesses an internal, subjective aspect to its waking life is a subject of experience. Philosophers refer to the raw, subjective, felt essence of a mental state as qualia. It is the precise sensation of tasting lemon, the throbbing of a sharp pain, or the specific redness of a rose. In 1974, philosopher Thomas Nagel used the bat to prove a critical point about qualia. A bat navigates its world through echolocation, a sensory system entirely alien to humans. We can map the bat's entire neurophysiology, but that mapping will never tell us what it is like to actually be a bat. An internal reality exists that physical descriptions cannot capture. This exposes the explanatory gap. There is a missing logical bridge between observable physical processes, like sound waves hitting a tympanic membrane, and the unobservable, phenomenal experience of hearing a high-pitched screech. Why doesn't all this complex neural information processing just happen in the dark? There is no obvious reason why the discrimination of electromagnetic waveforms by a visual system must be experienced as a sensation of vivid blue, rather than just a silent data transfer. Because subjective experience is not automatically entailed by the physical facts of the brain, our current physicalist model of the universe, the idea that everything reduces to physical matter, is structurally incomplete. To test the limits of physicalism, philosophers employ a theoretical thought experiment that strips away the biological hardware. This is the concept of the philosophical zombie, or P-zombie. In academic philosophy, a zombie is an exact, atom-for-atom physical duplicate of a functioning human being. This duplicate is functionally identical to you. If you poke it, it processes the stimulus, recoils, and reports feeling pain. It holds conversations, navigates its environment, and exhibits all external markers. This relies on the principle of organizational invariance. The principle states that the abstract pattern of causal interaction dictates behavior, regardless of the specific physical makeup. If your neural organization were perfectly duplicated in silicon, the artificial system would produce identical behavioral results. But there is a metaphysical distinction. The philosophical zombie possesses zero phenomenal consciousness. All data processing happens completely in the dark. There is nothing it is like to be this entity. This presents a profound epistemological problem. Because we only have access to the external behavior of others, and a zombie behaves exactly like a conscious human, we have no empirical way to prove that the people around us possess an inner life. If a perfect physical duplicate can logically exist without a shred of inner experience, then the physical facts alone do not guarantee the existence of consciousness. Consciousness, therefore, cannot be merely a physical property. The philosophical zombie provides the structural basis for a formal, inescapable logical derivation against a purely material universe. This diagram outlines the structure of the conceivability argument. Premise 1 establishes that p-zombies are conceptually coherent. Because we can imagine a system performing all cognitive functions without any accompanying experience, the concept contains no logical contradictions. Next, we apply a principle from Kripkean modal logic. Whatever is cleanly conceivable without logical contradiction is metaphysically possible. If we can conceive of a world physically identical to ours but lacking consciousness, then such a world is possible. This brings us to a final conclusion regarding the limits of physical laws. If a creator perfectly fixed every physical fact, but still had to do extra work to add consciousness, then the physical facts alone do not entail the mental facts. Materialist philosophers attempt to counter this proof by relying on a posteriori necessity. They argue that just because something is conceivable does not make it possible in our universe. We can conceive of water not being H2O, even though scientifically it must be. But the mind-body problem resists this scientific reduction. Identifying water as H2O explains its structural behavior. Because consciousness is defined by its subjective feel, not by its structural behavior, mapping the physical structure of the brain leaves the core phenomenon unexplained. The strict logical coherence of the empty vessel forces us to look elsewhere. If physical processes are fully articulated without invoking subjective experience, the universe must contain non-physical facts. If the physical world is a completely closed causal system, where every effect has a physical cause, we run into a logical dead end. We arrive at a philosophical position known as epiphenomenalism. This idea has its roots in 19th century neurophysiology, which posited that human beings are conscious automata. In this view, the brain operates entirely on mechanical principles, and consciousness is a causally inert byproduct floating alongside it. Biologist T.H. Huxley argued our subjective experiences are like a steam engine's whistle, a secondary effect with no power to drive the machinery. The implication of epiphenomenalism is that your inner life has no causal effect on physical actions. Your body simply reacts mechanically, while the conscious mind remains a trapped, powerless observer. But this view collapses under its own contradiction. If qualia are truly causally inert and incapable of affecting physical matter, how are we able to consciously think about and discuss them? Our ability to report on our own experience proves it must play some causal role. Because strict physicalism and epiphenomenalism result in logical paradoxes, we require an entirely new theoretical framework. To cross the explanatory gap, philosopher David Chalmers proposes a non-reductive solution. When standard mechanics fail, physicists expand the universe's baseline ontology by adding new fundamental properties. James Clerk Maxwell realized wholly mechanical processes could not explain electromagnetism. Instead, physicists added electromagnetic charge to the fundamental laws of nature. Chalmers proposes the double aspect theory of information, a single unit of information split into two basic aspects. The physical node represents the mechanical aspect, the causal signals governing biological functions. Alongside it, the phenomenal node represents the internal aspect, where subjective experience naturally arises. Chalmers terms this stance naturalistic dualism. It does not invoke mysticism. It simply supplements physical theory with bridging principles connecting information to experience. Within this framework, subjective experience becomes a fundamental property of the universe, sitting alongside mass and space-time as a basic ingredient of reality. We return to the physical brain's machinery. We can map every neural oscillation, trace every electrical impulse, and fully articulate an organism's physical processing. But until science accepts consciousness as a fundamental ingredient of the cosmos, we will map the wiring of the machine without ever capturing the ghost inside it.